Ryan only meant to visit his grandfather's grave to ease the guilt that had haunted him since the funeral. But as he knelt by the headstone, he noticed fresh soil slightly lifted at the base. Something was buried there, something recent. His fingers dug into the dirt until they struck paper. It was a weathered envelope with his name on it, in his grandfather's handwriting. Inside was a letter that would tear open a family secret buried for decades and change Ryan's life forever. The cemetery was silent, except for the crunch of gravel under Ryan's sneakers. Clouds rolled overhead, casting shadows on the crooked line of graves that stretched out before him. He held a bouquet of crumpled white lilies in one hand and a note in the other that he couldn't bring himself to read. Not yet. The last time he had stood at his grandfather's grave was the day they buried him, almost 13 months ago. He didn't cry that day, not because he didn't care, far from it. Ryan had loved his grandfather more than anyone, but because something inside him had locked shut, like a door bolted from the inside. Now, as the August breeze stirred the trees above, guilt swirled in his chest like a storm. It wasn't just that he had stayed away, it was what he had said the last time they spoke. "You wouldn't understand," Ryan had told his grandfather, slamming the door behind him. "You never do." He had stormed out that evening, furious about something stupid, his college dreams, his parents' expectations, money, and he never got to say sorry. His grandfather had died of a stroke just 3 days later. Ryan kneeled before the grave, placing the lilies awkwardly against the stone. The engraved letters stared back at him. Franklin James Carter, 1929 to 2024. The quietest hearts leave the loudest echoes. Ryan exhaled and whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandpa." For a moment, all was still. Then something strange caught his attention, a small mound of fresh dirt just beside the stone. Not part of the landscaped path or the flower bed, a soft patch, disturbed recently, too recently. Curiosity prickled at his fingers. He glanced around. No one else was in sight. With hesitant hands, he reached down and brushed the soil aside. His fingertips hit something soft but firm, paper. He dug deeper, pulling out a clear plastic bag with an envelope inside. Dusty, a bit damp, but unmistakable. His breath caught in his throat. His name was written on the front, Ryan, in his grandfather's unmistakable looping handwriting. He looked around again, heart thudding. Was this some kind of prank? Who had buried it? Why now? He opened the bag, took out the letter, and unfolded it slowly. The first line made his throat tighten. "If you're reading this, it means you finally came back. I hoped you would. I prayed for it. And there's something I need to tell you. Something I've never told anyone, not even your mother." Ryan's hands trembled. The rest of the letter stretched into paragraphs, but before he could continue reading, a voice behind him made him jump. "Hey, what are you doing?" A security guard stood near the iron gate, his brow furrowed. Ryan hastily shoved the letter back into the envelope and the envelope into his jacket. "Nothing," Ryan said quickly, "just visiting." The guard nodded slowly, but kept watching. Ryan left the graveyard with the letter pressed against his chest, like a secret he wasn't ready to face. His mind spun with questions. What could be so important his grandfather would hide it like this? And why now? Back home, he locked his bedroom door and sat on the edge of his bed, heart pounding. The envelope lay before him like a ghost from the past. He opened it again. The letter continued. I know you're angry with the world, and I understand. There are things your parents never told you, things I wasn't allowed to speak about while I was alive. But now it's time for the truth. Go to the shed behind the cabin. Under the floorboards, you'll find a metal box. Inside is everything. Ryan blinked. The cabin? Their family owned a tiny old cabin near Lake Pendle. They hadn't been there in years. It was his grandfather's favorite place, somewhere he used to take Ryan when he was little, teaching him to fish and build fires and how to listen to the wind. Why would something be hidden there? He reread the line again and again. Under the floorboards, you'll find a metal box. His heart raced with something that felt like fear, but also purpose, a sense that his life was about to split in two, before the letter and after. Later that evening, he told his mother he was heading out for the weekend with friends. She barely looked up at her laptop. "Just text me when you get there." He packed a backpack, threw in some snacks, a flashlight, and a small crowbar, just in case. By midnight, he was standing outside the old cabin, wind whistling through the broken trees. The place looked abandoned. The porch creaked as he stepped onto it. The door was still unlocked. No one had been here in years. He made his way inside, each floorboard groaning beneath his weight. Dust floated in the beam of his flashlight. Cobwebs clung to every corner. The letter had said, "Under the floorboards." He walked to the middle of the living room, where he remembered playing cards with his grandfather beside the fire, and began tapping each board until one sounded hollow. There. He pried it open. Beneath it was a small, rusted metal box, just like the letter said. His hands trembled as he pulled it free. He stared at the box. 100 thoughts ran through his head. What could be in there? Money? Photos? A will? Or something worse? He took a deep breath and unlatched it. And what he found inside changed everything he thought he knew about his family, his past, and even his own identity.
Ryan's hands trembled as he held the letter, the corners brittle from age, the ink slightly faded but still legible. The words, "Read alone," seemed to echo in his mind like thunder in a canyon. With a glance over his shoulder to make sure he was truly alone, he unfolded the pages, his heart racing with a strange mixture of fear and longing. The letter began simply, "My dearest Ryan, if you're reading this, then I've already left this world. But there are truths you were never told, things I couldn't take to my grave." His breath caught. "You've always been a kind soul, but I need to tell you something about your father, something he never knew either, and it starts long before you were born." Ryan blinked, confusion swirling in his chest. His father? What did Grandpa mean? "In 1986, I made a mistake, a terrible one. I fell in love with a woman named Eleanor. She was unlike anyone I had ever met, gentle, full of fire, and very much married to my best friend at the time. That man was your grandmother's brother, your great-uncle Thomas." Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears. A love affair? "I never meant for it to happen, but it did. For a brief moment we believed the world would forgive us. Eleanor became pregnant. The child she carried was your father, David." Ryan stood abruptly, nearly tripping over the uneven soil. The wind around him picked up, as if nature itself was reacting to the revelation. His grandfather wasn't just his grandfather. He was actually his real grandfather, but through an affair that had been buried for decades. David was raised believing Thomas was his father, and I allowed it. I never fought for him. I thought it was best, but it haunted me every single day. I watched my own son grow up from the sidelines. Ryan's eyes welled with tears. He had always noticed a strange tension between his father and grandfather, like they cared deeply for each other, but couldn't ever say why. He thought it was just generational silence. Now he knew it was guilt, shame, grief, I tried to be close, to be around you, Ryan, because in you I saw a chance to be a grandfather the right way, and I failed again. I kept my silence. But I hope this letter helps you understand the cracks in our family. I hope it gives you the strength to break the cycle." Ryan's knees gave way, and he sank onto the grass beside the grave, the letter shaking in his grip. He read the final lines. "You always ask me why I kept that old piano in the basement. It wasn't just nostalgia. Beneath the floorboards is a box, the rest of the truth. Go there. Take only the key I left in my Bible. And when you find it, forgive me." Suddenly, Ryan remembered something strange. Just 2 weeks before Grandpa died, he'd visited the house and noticed his grandfather lingering in the basement, hands on the piano, staring into the floor as if something were calling from beneath. He hadn't thought much of it until now. A fresh storm of adrenaline surged through him. He stuffed the letter into his jacket and ran from the cemetery with no concern for direction, only one mission beating in his chest: find the box. Back at the old family house, now shuttered and quiet, Ryan used the spare key hidden in the birdhouse. The house smelled like dust and old memories. He found his grandfather's worn Bible on the shelf above the fireplace, exactly where it had always been. Inside, wedged between Psalms and Proverbs, was a small brass key with a red ribbon tied to it. The basement was colder than usual. The air had that stillness, that eerie quiet that made his breath sound like thunder. He approached the piano, heart pounding, and slowly moved it aside. Beneath it was a set of floorboards, warped at the edges. He pried one loose and found an old metal lockbox inside, wrapped in a yellowed cloth. The key clicked in. The lid opened. Inside was a stack of photographs, letters, and at the very bottom, a birth certificate. He pulled it out. His father's name, his grandmother's name, and in the father section, Henry Caldwell. Not Thomas. Not the man the world believed to be his father. Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. The box also held an old video cassette labeled, "To David, for when you're ready." He clutched it all to his chest, overwhelmed, every piece of his family history unraveling in his hands. And then came the knock at the door. Ryan froze. No one was supposed to know he was here. When he opened it, his father stood on the porch, eyes hollow, holding a letter identical to the one Ryan had just read.
Ryan's fingers trembled as he stepped back from the door. His father, David Caldwell, stood there, older than Ryan had ever seen him, shoulders sunken, his face pale as ash. In his hand, David clutched a crumpled, opened letter. The same letter, the same handwriting. Grandpa had written to both of them. They stared at each other in silence, the cold air between them filled with something neither had the courage to name. David's voice cracked as he finally spoke. "You read it too?" Ryan could only nod, his throat too tight to answer. David stepped inside the house, his eyes sweeping the living room, the walls lined with photos of a life now covered in shadows. He looked toward the basement stairs. "You went down there?" Ryan slowly handed him the box. His father took it and sat down on the old couch, the weight of it almost too much for him to bear. He opened it and stared at the contents, the birth certificate, the photos, the cassette. His fingers hovered over the videotape. This was supposed to be my proof. All these years I wondered why I never felt right, like I didn't belong. Ryan sat beside him. "Did you ever suspect?" David shook his head. "No, but I always felt like there was a wall between me and Dad. I thought it was me, that I wasn't good enough. But now—" He broke off, his eyes welling with tears. "Now I know it was guilt. He loved me, but he could never say it. Not the way I needed." The silence pressed in again, broken only by the sound of the VHS cassette being slowly turned in David's hand. "There's still an old player in the attic. We could watch it." David hesitated. And then he nodded. They set the player up on the small TV that had been in the corner of the basement for decades. Dust covered everything, but Ryan wiped it clean, his heart racing. As the tape slid in, the machine groaned to life, whirring like a forgotten relic of time. Then the screen flickered, and Henry Caldwell, Grandpa, appeared. He looked younger, maybe mid-50s, his hair only slightly gray. He sat on the same couch they had just been on. He looked into the camera with hollow eyes. "David," he began, voice thick with regret, "if you're seeing this, that I've failed to say what I should have said years ago. I am your father." David's face twisted as if he'd been punched. He leaned forward, not blinking as Henry continued. "I fell in love with your mother during a time when everything was falling apart. Thomas was away for work, Eleanor was lonely, and I—" Henry paused, lowering his head. "There is no excuse, but you were born of love, not a mistake." David covered his mouth, trying to hold back a sob. The tape went on. "I let fear dictate my life. I thought staying silent was the right thing, but I was wrong. I was your father. I should have told you, should have fought for you. And by the time I tried, it felt too late. You were already calling someone else Dad, and I was the coward in the corner." He looked into the camera, eyes glassy. "I watched you grow up, and I was proud of you, even from the sidelines. When Ryan was born, I saw a second chance. I tried to do better with him, even if I didn't know how, but guilt clung to me like chains." The screen shook slightly as Henry wiped his eyes. "If you can, forgive me. I can't make it right, but maybe you and Ryan can heal where I couldn't." The screen faded to black. David stood up, pacing, hands gripping his hair. "He lied to me my whole life, and still I miss him. I mourned the wrong man at his funeral." Ryan stood too. "He tried, Dad. He was broken, but he tried." David turned to Ryan, suddenly haunted. "Your grandmother, does she know? Did she know all this time?" Ryan paused. "I don't know. I never met her. She died before I was born." David began to walk upstairs, the box clutched in his hand. "There's only one way to know. We need to speak to Thomas. He might still be alive." Ryan blinked. "You want to dig deeper?" David turned, fire in his eyes. "I spent my life living someone else's truth. I need to know the full story." 2 days later, they were in a nursing home in a small town an hour outside the city. A nurse led them into a quiet room where a frail old man sat by the window staring out at the clouds. Thomas Caldwell, the man David had always believed was his father. He turned when he saw them. David didn't waste time. He pulled out the birth certificate, the tape, the letter. "Did you know?" Thomas stared at them, his eyes dull with age but not ignorance. Slowly he spoke. "Yes, I knew." Ryan's chest tightened. David stood still. "You knew and said nothing?" Thomas nodded weakly. "Eleanor told me, on her deathbed. I kept the secret because I loved her. And I loved you, David. You were my son in every way that mattered." David collapsed into a chair, shaking. "Why didn't anyone tell me the truth?" Thomas looked at him with the deepest sadness. "Because we thought silence was mercy. We thought lies could protect you. We were wrong." Ryan suddenly saw it all clearly. Generations of men failing each other, bound by secrets, choked by silence, desperate for love and too afraid to ask for it. And now the silence was broken.
2 months had passed since Ryan unearthed the letter beneath his grandfather's grave, and nothing about his life had remained the same. He had walked into the cemetery a confused, grieving boy, and emerged with purpose, identity, and an aching understanding of sacrifice. Now, standing in front of a room filled with faces both familiar and foreign, he held the very same letter in his hand, trembling slightly. The town had gathered in the local community hall, which was now freshly painted and renamed the Arthur and Noah Pierce Center for Forgotten Families. Ryan stood at the podium as the guest of honor, flanked by Ava, Aunt Lillian, and his newly discovered uncle Eli, a man he now proudly called family. He took a shaky breath and began to speak. 2 months ago, I found a letter buried under my grandfather's grave. It was from a man I never knew, my great-grandfather, Noah. In that letter, he didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses. He just wanted to be remembered, and for the truth to no longer die with him. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. We all carry pain. Some of us pass it down. But others, like my grandfather, spend their whole lives trying to protect the next generation from repeating those same mistakes. My grandfather Arthur was a man of few words, but his actions said everything. He gave up knowing his own father to give me a life without hate. There was a long pause. The silence in the room was not empty. It was reverent. He hid the letter so I could find it when I was ready, and now I know why. Because he knew the truth would break me before it freed me. And he was right. It did break me, but it also built me. After the speech, people rose from their chairs and clapped, not just for Ryan, but for the buried truths that had finally surfaced, for the wounds being stitched with honesty. That evening, Ryan sat alone in the center, staring at a glass display case. Inside was a photo of his great-grandfather Noah and his grandfather Arthur, side by side, young men in uniform, unknowing of the years of silence that would come between them. Below it lay the letter that changed everything, now preserved under protective glass with a single brass plaque. The truth doesn't destroy families, the silence does. A soft breeze swept through the open hall as Ava came to sit beside him. "You okay?" she asked. Ryan nodded, eyes wet. "Yeah, I think so. I think he wanted me to tell the story so it wouldn't get buried again." Ava smiled gently. "You gave them both peace." He looked at the letter again. His grandfather's careful handwriting now felt like an anchor in a storm he'd just survived. The secrets, the silences, the regrets, they were no longer his to carry alone. But that wasn't the end. In the weeks following, Ryan started a blog titled Letters Under the Stone. It became a place where people from all over the world could anonymously share the untold stories of their families, stories of love lost, identity hidden, or truths suppressed by fear. Within a year, it had gained a community of thousands. People weren't just reading, they were healing, together. And through it all, Ryan had kept that one photo of his grandfather tucked inside his wallet, the one where Arthur stood proud in his military uniform, a boyish grin on his face, long before the weight of family secrets hardened his eyes. Now, whenever Ryan felt lost or overwhelmed, he visited the grave again, but this time he didn't go with guilt. He went with gratitude, because his grandfather's final gift wasn't just the truth, it was permission to be whole.